Hi, I'm Tanya, and this is the Midnight Creak. Hidden on Scotland's cold northern coast stands a prison feared by inmates and guards alike. Riots, violence, despair, and whispers that some prisoners never truly left. Tonight, we step inside Peterhead Prison, Scotland's Alcatraz. If you like our content, please subscribe.
All right, team, we're diving deep into Peterhead Prison, a place I've heard countless chilling tales about. Let's start with the basics. What exactly is Peterhead Prison?
Well, Mark, Peterhead Prison, often, as you said, dubbed Scotland's Alcatraz, is a former maximum security prison located on the bleak North Sea coast in Aberdeenshire. It was built way back in 1888, so we're talking about a structure with over a century of incredibly dark history embedded in its stone.
Just hearing bleak North Sea coast already sends shivers down my spine. You can almost feel the isolation, couldn't you? What kind of people ended up there, Mark?
Oh, the worst of the worst, Andrew. It was specifically designed to house some of Scotland's most violent and hardened criminals. Its purpose was to hold convicts sentenced to hard labor, and that's precisely what they got. They were instrumental in building the massive Peterhead Harbor breakwater, quarrying granite nearby for that very purpose. Imagine, breaking rocks in that freezing coastal weather.
And you know they weren't exactly working with all the modern safety equipment either. I bet that was brutal. Just the sheer physical exertion, day in, day out, with the North Sea wind whipping around you. It's no wonder so much raw emotion and struggle seems to be clinging to the place.
Absolutely, Tarnia. And the conditions inside weren't any better, right? I've heard stories about how utterly horrific it was.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Freezing, overcrowded. I mean, when you're dealing with that level of deprivation and a constant struggle for survival, it breeds a certain kind of despair. That energy, I think, just embeds itself into the very fabric of the building.
You're absolutely right, Andrew. The conditions were infamously brutal. Prisoners were often locked in tiny, stone cells, often for years on end. Overcrowding was a constant issue, and the biting cold from the North Sea permeated every single stone. There was very little in the way of comfort or human dignity there, honestly.
And when you're talking about tiny stone cells, we're not talking about a little room here. We're talking about just enough space for a cot, a bucket, and a person. Imagine that isolation, that sensory deprivation, combined with the freezing temperatures. It's a recipe for utter psychological torment.
It sounds like a living nightmare. And this brings us to one of its darkest chapters, the 1987 siege. Mark, can you walk us through what happened there? Because that really cemented Peterhead's reputation.
Oh, absolutely. The 1987 siege was a pivotal moment. Violent inmates in D Wing took over, and in a truly terrifying turn of events, they took prison officer Jackie Stewart hostage. He was held up in the rafters for several days. It was an incredibly tense and dangerous standoff.
Held in the rafters for days? That's just unimaginable. The fear that man must have felt knowing he was completely at the mercy of some of the most dangerous individuals in the country. My heart just aches thinking about that.
And it wasn't just a standoff either. It got so bad, so out of control, that the situation escalated to the point where they had to call in the Special Air Service, the SAS. Yes, that SAS. They stormed the prison to end the siege. It's pretty wild to think about.
The SAS being called into a British prison, that tells you just how dire things were. It's an almost cinematic level of intensity. So, after all this history of hardship, violence, and despair, the prison eventually closed its doors, right?
That's right, Sarah. It finally closed in 2013, thankfully for the sake of humanity, I suppose. But then, rather than demolishing it, it reopened as a museum, which in hindsight was probably the best thing to do, to preserve that grim history and offer a window into what life was like there.
And that's where things start to get interesting from our perspective, isn't it? Because when you have a place with such a concentrated history of intense human emotion, fear, anger, desperation, and violence, and then you open it up to the public, well, you're bound to stir something up.
Absolutely. And since it reopened as a museum, it hasn't just been a place for historical tours. It's become a hotbed of paranormal activity. Staff, visitors, and even dedicated paranormal investigators have reported some truly strange experiences.
Oh, you're not kidding. I've been following some of the reports from Peterhead for a while now, and they're genuinely unsettling. We're talking about heavy footsteps echoing through empty corridors when no one else is there. That's a classic, but it's always effective.
And it's not just sounds, right? I've heard about cell doors slamming on their own. Imagine just walking by and suddenly, boom, a heavy metal door just clangs shut right behind you or in front of you. That's enough to make anyone jump out of their skin.
I mean, with old buildings, you get creaks and groans, drafts, things settling, but slamming doors, that requires a fair bit of force. And the sudden freezing cold spots, those are harder to explain away with just structural shifts.
Definitely. And then you have the whispers. People in the isolation blocks, which were probably the worst places to be, report hearing faint whispering voices when they're absolutely alone. Some have even caught shadow figures on CCTV, just fleeting glimpses of something that isn't quite right.
Shadow figures on CCTV, that's compelling evidence, especially when it's caught on camera. But beyond the visual and auditory, there are also the internal, visceral experiences, right? Feelings of dread, of being watched.
Yes, absolutely. People talk about just walking into certain cells and being overwhelmed by a sudden intense feeling of dread or the unsettling sensation that they're not alone, that unseen eyes are fixed on them. It's that psychological impact that always gets to me, you know?
And there's one particular area that seems to be a real hotspot for this kind of activity, a specific cell that keeps coming up in discussions, cell E19. Mark, what do we know about this infamous cell?
Cell E19 is, by all accounts, one of the most active locations within the prison. The stories surrounding it claim that an inmate tragically died by suicide in that very cell back in the 1930s. This event, obviously, marks it with a very specific, intense form of lingering emotional trauma.
That's just heartbreaking, a suicide, in isolation, in such a brutal place. It makes perfect sense that something would linger there. Visitors who enter E19 have reported experiencing dizziness, a sudden pressure in their chest, like something's pushing down on them, and those classic, unexplained temperature drops.
And it's not just regular visitors making these claims. Paranormal teams that have investigated Peterhead Prison have consistently identified E19 as one of the most energetically charged and active locations in the entire building. They've captured EVPs, EMF spikes, all sorts of readings pointing to something very much still present.
So it's not just anecdotal, there's some attempt at scientific corroboration from the paranormal investigation community. Given all these reports, it's no surprise that the prison now hosts overnight ghost hunts, right? Mark, you'd be all over that, wouldn't you?
Are you kidding? I'd be there in a heartbeat. They actually let guests explore the dark wings after hours using all the cool gear, EMF readers to detect electromagnetic field fluctuations, which some believe indicate spiritual presence, spirit boxes, which rapidly scan radio frequencies to generate white noise, supposedly allowing entities to speak through, and of course night vision cameras to catch anything unseen in the dark. It sounds like an absolute dream for an investigator.
It sounds terrifying, but in a compelling way. I think for many, it's not just about proving ghosts exist, but about connecting with the raw history of the place. To walk those corridors, to sit in those cells, and feel that atmosphere, it must be incredibly powerful, even if nothing overtly paranormal happens.
I can certainly appreciate the historical immersion. However, I remain cautiously skeptical about the equipment. EMF readers can pick up all sorts of electrical interference, and spirit boxes are, well, essentially just random radio noise. It's very easy to project meaning onto random sounds when you're in a highly suggestive environment like an old, dark prison.
That's a fair point, Andrew. The power of suggestion is strong, especially in a place with such a grim reputation. But what's undeniable is that many people who participate in these ghost hunts Even those who go in as skeptics often leave convinced that something still lingers behind those old prison walls.
Exactly. It's one thing to read about it, another to experience it. When you're there, in the pitch black, and you hear a whisper that couldn't possibly be anyone else, or feel that sudden pressure, or the air just drops 10 degrees, that's not easily dismissed. It gets to you on a primal level.
I think it speaks to the profound human suffering that occurred there. Whether you believe in traditional ghosts or just residual energy, the sheer weight of what happened at Peterhead, the lives lived and lost in such desperate conditions, it leaves an indelible mark, and perhaps, sometimes, those marks can still be felt, seen, or heard.
From a purely historical standpoint, Peterhead Prison serves as a stark reminder of a darker period in justice and incarceration. The tales of the paranormal, whether verifiable or not, simply add another layer to its compelling, albeit horrifying, narrative. It ensures the stories of its past and the people within its walls continue to be told.
And that, I think, is the true power of places like Peterhead Prison Museum. They force us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, about confinement, and about what might persist long after the last prisoner has left. So whether you're a skeptic or a believer, Peterhead Prison offers an experience that will undoubtedly stay with you.
Thank you, Mark, Sarah, and Andrew, for sharing your insights on this truly haunting location. To our listeners, if you ever find yourself on Scotland's rugged North Sea coast, perhaps dare to step inside Peterhead Prison. But be warned, you might just leave with more than just a history lesson. This has been the Midnight Creak. Until next time, stay curious and stay afraid.